ever wondered what the biggest military blunder in the Middle Ages was? We're talking about a disaster so epic, so unbelievably misguided, that it sounds like something out of a comedy sketch. Forget what you think you know about medieval warfare. Today, we're diving into the story of the so-called Children's Crusade. Now, the year is 1212. Europe is deep in the era of Crusades, with knights and kings marching off to the Holy Land. But the official Crusades were expensive, bloody, and not always successful. The religious fervor, however, was at an all-time high. People were desperate for a miracle, a sign that God was on their side. And it's in this atmosphere of intense faith and frustration that our story begins. Enter a young shepherd boy from France named Stephen of Cloyes. One day, Stephen claims he has a letter for the French king, a letter delivered to him by none other than Jesus Christ himself. This letter, he said, was a call to arms, but not for knights or soldiers. No, this was a call for the pure of heart, the innocent children, to march to the Holy Land. Stephen preached that their innocence was a weapon far more powerful than any sword or shield. He believed the Mediterranean Sea would part for them, just like the Red Sea did for Moses, allowing them to walk to Jerusalem and peacefully convert Muslims to Christianity. It sounds absolutely wild, right? But you have to understand the mindset of the time. People were captivated. Stephen's message spread like wildfire. Thousands of followers, many of them adolescents and young adults, but also some younger children and even poor adults, flocked to his side. They left their homes, their families, their entire lives to join this incredible, idealistic quest. They were called the pueri, a Latin word that can mean boys or children, which is where the name Children's Crusade comes from. Imagine the scene. A massive procession of thousands marching across France, fueled by nothing but faith and the charismatic words of a young boy. They had no supplies, no plan, no military training. They just walked, singing hymns and believing a miracle was just around the corner. They made their way south to the port city of Marseille, expecting the sea to roll back and reveal a dry path to the Holy Land. They arrived at the coast, thousands of them, weary but full of hope. They stood at the water's edge, waiting, and nothing happened. The sea did not part. The miracle they had been promised failed to materialize. You can just feel the crushing wave of disappointment and confusion that must have swept over the crowd. Their entire journey, their sacrifices, all for this moment, and it was a total failure. Now, here's where the story gets even more tragic. According to some accounts, two merchants in Marseille, named Hugh the Iron and William the Pig, yes, really, offered to help. They provided 7 ships to take the children across the sea to the Holy Land for free, out of the goodness of their hearts. The desperate crowd, seeing a new glimmer of hope, piled onto the ships. But this act of kindness was a cruel deception. 2 of the ships were wrecked in a storm off the coast of Sardinia, and everyone on board was lost. The remaining 5 ships didn't sail to the Holy Land. Instead, the merchants sailed them straight to the coasts of North Africa, to Bougie and Alexandria. There, the remaining thousands of followers, the hopeful, innocent crusaders, were sold into slavery. A journey that began with pure faith ended in the most brutal and heartbreaking betrayal imaginable. Meanwhile, a similar movement was happening in Germany, led by a boy named Nicholas of Cologne. Nicholas also preached that he could gather an army of children who would march to the Holy Land. He, too, promised the sea would part for them. His followers, numbering in the tens of thousands, marched south. Their journey was arguably even more difficult. They had to cross the Alps. Think about that for a second. An army of poorly clothed, starving people, many of them children, trying to cross one of the most formidable mountain ranges in Europe. Thousands perished from starvation and exhaustion along the way. They had no idea what they were facing. They were just following a dream. The survivors eventually split into 2 groups. One group went to Pisa and then on to Rome. When they reached the city, they met with Pope Innocent III. The Pope was moved by their piety, but he was also a pragmatist. He saw this for what it was, a beautiful but doomed idea. He gently praised their zeal, but absolved them of their crusading vows and told them to go home. The journey back was just as brutal as the journey there, and very few ever saw their homes again. Many who survived the trip to Italy simply stayed there, their old lives gone forever. The other group, led by Nicholas himself, made it to the port of Genoa. And just like Stephen's followers in Marseille, they stood at the shore, waiting for the sea to part. Again, it didn't. Some of the disillusioned followers stayed in Genoa, finding work and starting new lives. Nicholas, undeterred, led the rest to Pisa. There, they did manage to find passage on ships heading towards the Holy Land. But what happened to them after that is lost to history. Some tales say Nicholas himself survived and fought in a later official crusade, but for most of his followers, their fate remains a tragic mystery. So, why do we call this the biggest military fail? Because it wasn't a military campaign at all. It was a social and religious phenomenon born of desperation, a complete and utter catastrophe based on a naive and impossible dream. It involved no battles, no strategy, just a long, painful march to disaster. Tens of thousands of lives were thrown away. It is a powerful and grim reminder of how charismatic leaders and blind faith can lead people down a path to ruin. Historians today debate many of the details. Some argue the term puare might have meant the poor and landless rather than literal children, and that the story has been exaggerated over the centuries. But whether they were 12 or Vinci, the core of the story remains a powerful tragedy. These were movements of the dispossessed, the people left behind by the official, knightly crusades, who desperately wanted to play their part. The Children's Crusades stands as a stark lesson from the Middle Ages. It shows the danger of zeal without wisdom, and the heartbreaking consequences of when hope turns into delusion. It wasn't a battle lost on a field. It was a war lost in the hearts and minds of those who promised a miracle that could never come. It's a story that's both bizarre and deeply human, a footnote in the grand history of the Crusades, but one that echoes with the voices of the thousands who were lost. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey back in time. It's a somber tale, but an important one to remember. If you found this story fascinating, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives into the weirdest and most incredible moments in history. Let me know in the comments what historical event you want me to cover next. See you in the next video!